Today, I'd like to really share an important thing that I think most of us tend to overlook, and that is the recognition that behind creation, there is something else that is giving life to everything that we see. And very often we call this, of course, God or Spirit. But one of the things that I find that's happening in our increasing secular world is that we have all these mathematical formulas that can explain how the world was made. And we are able to dissect and overlook a variety of different species of life and to talk about how it evolved, including ourselves. But what's sad is that we've reduced God to mere scientific formula. We've said that somehow there was a great big bang in the universe, and some theorists suggest that at some point the universe will shrivel down just like it did a long time ago, only then to have another big bang and to continue the expansion. However you wish to understand the scientific understanding of the world, I believe very strongly that there is a spiritual force that is including our own. But before I get into that, let's just look at the passages that are provided for you today. Now, the book of Genesis was written at a time, particularly this chapter, when the people of Israel were in captivity in Babylon. They had no creation story at all. This is actually one of their very first. And what they had discovered when they came in contact with the Babylonian culture was that they also believed in a great being that made everything. And so they began to think about God and how he made the world, and they created this unique story, which is very liturgical and often emphasizes the priestly tradition, because by the end of the story it talks about the Sabbath, in which God needed to rest after all that he made. It's a beautiful story, but two things I want you to pay attention to. Nothing was in existence at the very beginning. Nothing. There's total darkness. There's also chaos. There's no order or fashion to anything until God speaks. Let there be light. And there was light. When God speaks, things happen. Things come into their order. And what is being portrayed in the story is that God takes chaos and makes sense of it by wielding a large theme of meaning and hopefulness and purpose. That there is no such thing as an accident. That there is an unfolding of everything by its primary intention. The other thing that's important is the word bara, or in this case, in a beginning, God created. Bara. Bara in Hebrew talks about a different kind of creativity. It is taking out of nothing, making it into something. And it's a continuous unfolding process. It's not like what we do as human beings, in which we have an idea and then we go to work to make it happen. Instead, this very nature of creation has a life of its own. And it breathes a life that gives testimony to something greater. In the book of Romans, we have a different passage. And in this passage, Paul is writing to the Church of Rome. And what he's acknowledging is this: God has always manifested himself through creation. All you have to do is look at the world and know that there's got to be something greater than ourselves. But for whatever reasons, people decided not to pay attention to it. And they started to create gods out of stone. Human figures with mythological tales to talk about how the world was made. And Paul is saying, don't you realize the grace of God and his love is already here in the beauty of nature? What has blinded you from being able to see the fundamentals of God at work in our lives? And finally, in the Gospel of John, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about it. It is, after all, my first day back at work, but here's the essence. A verse that you should pay attention to. The Word became flesh. And here's the translation. And he pitched his tent and dwelt among us. God wants to be involved with his creation. God wants to be involved in your life and in mine. And God wants to play with that which he has made from the beginning. All right. The Creator and creation, in essence, what is its basis? Its spirit. And how do I know that? Because creation is more than a chemical process. It's more than a biological influence. These things we can detect. We know this out of our scientific knowledge. But what we can't understand is the orderliness that everything is built upon. And its ultimate chain reaction, when you fundamentally change one element, it has an impact on another. There is an integration, a unification. There is a meaning and a purpose to the order of the universe. Let me explain to you very quickly where I came up with this idea. A couple nights ago, I was watching a beautiful show on Stephen Hawking. Many of you may know him. He's sort of the Einstein for the 21st century, if I can say that. And he talks about creation and he talks about God. And one of the things about Stephen Hawking is that he never did believe that there was a God. And so he tries mathematically to come up with a formula that explains how the universe came to be. And what was interesting is his theory on black holes, which I won't go into a lot of detail on, other than to tell you that black holes are a form of recycling the energy of the universe. I was surprised to discover that. I always understood that black holes meant the end of our existence. But apparently, little bits of radiation come out of black holes. It's recycling the universe. It sucks in the material and passes it out in the form of a mild radiation. But here's the thing. One scientist said, I have two theories about the universe. The first is, it's a mathematical equation. But he says, it's so perfect. It's so beautiful. There has to be something greater. But we can't know what it is. Recently, most of you will know that in Switzerland, there's a huge, and I'm just going to call it a circular tunnel, which they take protons and they fire them against each other. And they said they discovered the God particle, the very foundation of the universe, what made everything. The God particle, it's called. That is science. But what made the God particle? There is, I believe, an unfolding and purpose to the universe. Let me give you a simple case in point. Remember our ancestors 4 billion years ago? We were cave dwellers. We didn't look the way we look now. We didn't talk the way we talk now. We didn't understand the world as we understand it today. Look at the evolutionary process and what has happened. Everything has been unfolding to make us better. Now, I know that most of you will say, well, Stephen, we're no better than our ancestors were. Maybe that's true. But I say to you that from the moment of time, God's plan is that that which is made keeps changing, evolving, becoming new and different, because it lends an expression to the creative act, but more importantly, it leads to the ultimate intention of God's will for the world. Those of you who know your history, you know your history well. Remember how we used to live. Remember how we used to live out our lives and have our relationships. Notice the changes that are happening in our society today, whether it be about racial prejudice or sexual orientation, you name it. Where's all this coming from? Is a rise in our consciousness and our being and the willingness to realize that we all have to live together. And notice recently with Senator McCain's death, there's a rising against the Trump administration because it's rude, it's crude, it's belligerent. And people are looking for civility. They're looking for respect to disagree while being friends. Where does this come from? It was always with us from our beginning, but we are evolving all the time into something new and very different. That's the magic of creation, and it's God's will and intention that that's the way it should be. Nothing stays the same. Recently in the China Sea, we have new islands that are coming up from the bottom of the ocean through volcanic action, just like the Hawaiian Islands were created. We're starting to see a shift in the planet and its tectonic plates. We're seeing changes that are evolving because creation doesn't stay the same. Part of the creative act is always the introduction of change. which introduces frustration and anxiety for a lot of us, but which is leading to something better. I recently was at the United Church General Council. One of the great questions we talked about was the dying church, our dying church. And someone got up on the floor and said a very intelligent thing. We're not dying, we're changing, we're evolving. Worship is changing and evolving. Things can't be the way they were in 1925. And our concept of God is evolving and changing, not like it was in 1925. And that is what is good about creation. And that's the Genesis story. For God desires to bring order out of chaos, to bring life out of death, to continually renew and reshape and reconfigure the essence of life. And you're a part of that process. Those of you who are aging, you know this. You aren't what you used to be. But in many ways, you're more beautiful now than you were when you were an infant. I know you're shocked, but it's true. Because your mind, your sense of self has expanded. And you see more and know more, and have also learned your place in the world. Number 2. Because creation is this wonderful world that keeps evolving and changing and is being led by God's intent, so I like to declare, it motivates us to want to be close to that source of power, which is why we worship. Why do we worship? Because as we evolve and as we change, we struggle in our limitations. We struggle with the content of what we are made of. And we know that inside us is a voice that's crying out saying, we can do this, and we can go this way, but we need to have that energy, that spirit, that consciousness that makes us enlightened to our direction. And that can only happen when we pay homage to the one who made us. Now, I know that there are some of you who will say when I wander in the woods, oh, that's my God right there. Or when I'm out in a boat and I'm fishing in the middle of the lake and there's a nice sunset, God is there. Yes, I know that. But that's not worship. What you're doing is you're feeling the power of the creative energy. But what you're not doing is communing with that power. You're just acknowledging it. You're feeling it. But what's it telling you to do? Where does it want you to lead? And that's why we worship. And in Romans, Paul tried to tell them that. Why do we gather? Not to build statues, to bow to and to say, oh God, help us. We come together to know the power and the energy of the universe that continues to ring true toward the essence of life, that it has to evolve and constantly change for what is better. And finally, my last point, and it's this. God has pitched his tent. We are told in Jesus, God pitches his tent. Think about that, those of you who love camping. He pitches his tent and he wants to dwell with us. Why? Because God wants to play with what he has made. You, me, and this incredible world we live in. God is evoking us to grow in order that we might become. And he wants to dwell with us always. Amen.